Hi, this is Bruce Buffer, your voice of the Octagon, and you're listening to MMA Mental.
Welcome to this week's MMA Mental Roundtable. We are here once again to break down the UFC 163 main card. As always, I'm joined by regular panellists Brooks Bailey and UFC middleweight Luke Barnatt. We've got a new addition this week. We've got MMA journalist Brad Wharton. Brad, thanks for joining the panel this week.
No problem, guys. Thanks for having me.
And we're pleased to be having you on a regular basis. So what we're going to do then, we're going to focus on what we think are the main fights from UFC 163. We've picked up 6 fights. We'll go around, we'll give our predictions, and as always, we'll keep a running total so we can really see who is the knowledgeable MMA person. And normally it's not me. Okay, let's start with light heavyweight bout between Vinny Magalhaes and Anthony Perosh. This is an intriguing fight. We've all seen how good Vinny is on the ground. His ground game is obviously one of the what considered one of the best, especially at the 205 division. He struggles a little bit in the stand-up. His last fight wasn't great, but I know we'll be looking to build on that. Personally, I've never really been a big fan of Perosh. I've always thought he's been a little bit overrated. I think he's done the UFC some favours in the past with short notice fights. I think that's why they always have him back. But I fancy this as a bit of a showcase fight for Magalhaes to get back into winning ways. I think if he goes to the ground, which it probably will, I think he'll get a submission over Perosh. So I'm going to go for Magalhaes round 2 submission. So Brooks, what are your views on Vinny Magalhaes and Anthony Perosh?
In all honesty, I believe it's a bit of a mismatch here. I'm surprised Perosh is still around in the UFC. They like him, obviously. I know he did real well against Mirko Cro Cop before, I guess that was a few fights ago, but he did well against him, so that kind of surprised some people. And, ever since then, he hasn't looked great. But, Magalhaes is great on the ground. I know Perosh has got a really good ground game also, but Magalhaes is just on another level, world champion. So he's not going to be able to hang with him on the mat. Striking, I don't really think either of them are great. Magalhaes has definitely looked better recently with his striking. I know right before he came into the UFC, back to the UFC, he had a nice head kick knockout and everything. So I do think his striking is even better than Perosh too. So all around, I think he's just a little bit better than Anthony. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see a TKO or a knockout in this fight, but I'm going to go ahead and just predict that Magalhaes does what he does best, and he gets this fight to the mat, and he gets a submission in the first or second round.
No pressure, Brad, but this is your first prediction on the MMA Mental Roundtable. What are your views on this fight?
I think it's an easy one, man. I mean, Perosh got a shot in the UFC a few years ago because Ben Rothwell got food poisoning, and he was the only guy they could find to step up on 24 hours' notice to fight Cro Cop. And somehow he's managed to stick around, no disrespect to the guy, but he's 41 years old. He's probably coming to the end of his career in the UFC. And as you guys have said, Magalhaes probably just a little bit better in all areas. Perosh has got a 3rd-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, but Magalhaes, he's one of the elite grapplers in the sport. He's one of the best grappling coaches in the sport, and he can translate that to the cage as well. He's got decent hands, decent kickboxing as well, as he showed in his fight with Mikhail Zayat. So I'm going to go with Magalhaes. I'm going to go with maybe a 3rd-round stoppage. Whether he uses his fists or whether he gets a submission down on the mat, I'm not sure, but I see this fight going his way towards the end.
Luke, what are your views on this fight?
Well, obviously, I'm a little bit biased, having trained with Vinny quite extensively, obviously on the show, and afterwards over in Oregon, he came up and trained with us, and I trained with him in Vegas, where he lives now, so I'm definitely going to say Vinny, obviously, but I think for this fight, it's definitely a fight where I think Brooks said Vinny can showcase himself, and I think he can showcase himself on the feet more than on the ground. Obviously, we all know he's, like I said, world champion, one of the best grapplers in the world ever, and I think he's really going to show his stand-up skills in this fight. He has got like a ferocious head kick. I know Brooks mentioned that he got knocked out in M1 for that. And I've trained with him and I've seen his stand-up, and it's pretty impressive. I just think he has, he struggles to translate that into the cage competitively striking, If you want to stand and bang with Vinny in the training room, it's very difficult. So hopefully, you know, he got a bit of confidence built from his last fight. He took on a very, very tough guy in Phil Davis, and it didn't really go his way particularly. But I think it's still a learning curve taking on a guy like that, and I think he's going to be hungry and come in pretty strong. And I'm going to commit. I'm going to predict a knockout for Vinny or a TKO. You know, I don't think it will end on the mat, this one. I think it will definitely be on the feet. And I'm going to go for a second round.
Okay, so all four of us siding there with Vinny Magalhaes. Well, moving on to the main card. The opening bout of the main card is a flyweight fight between John Lineker, who we've seen fight a couple of times in the UFC, and he's looked pretty impressive. He's got some good power in his hands. And he's fighting a newcomer, Jose Tome, who, even though he's new to the UFC, has got a really extensive record. He's fought a hell of a lot of times. He's a very experienced fighter. And he's got a lot of stoppages as well. There's sometimes a little bit of criticism about flyweights and not finishing fights. Obviously, that wasn't the case at the weekend just gone. They're both Brazilians. Obviously, this event is in Brazil. I think this is a chance for them to introduce a new Brazilian flyweight. I think that's what they're looking to do with Tome. I think he's going to come in and he's going to really make a statement. I believe Lineker's 2-1 in the UFC. I know he lost to Luis Galdino, and I think he's won his last two. But I think Tome's going to come in and get a stoppage. I think we're going to see Tome get a submission. I think he's got something like 15 submission wins, which is fantastic. So I'm going to go for Tome to get a submission win. And rounds are always hard to pick, but I'll go Tome round 2 submission. Brooks, what are your views on this fight?
You know, I don't know a lot about Tome, but obviously, like you said, he's got a really long, extensive record in MMA, and he's got 33 wins compared to just 3 losses. So, I don't see a lot of notable competition on his record. But despite who you're fighting, if you're fighting 36 fights and you've won 33 of them, obviously you're really, really good. And like you said, he's got a heck of a lot of finishes here too. He's only fought to 3 decisions in his whole career, and he hasn't lost since 2008. You know, he trains out of a good camp with Renovico, I think is how you pronounce it, in Brazil. They had a lot of great fighters fighting out of there, and they're a pretty successful camp. As far as Lineker, he is one of my favorite flyweights. He comes in there and he brings it every time. He's really fun to watch. So, obviously with all these finishes between Tome and Lineker himself, this fight's probably going to be a fight of the night contender, and it's going to be really exciting. I really can't wait to see it. Lineker has just looked great, and he's got the experience inside the octagon, and I can't go against the guy who's got the experience in the octagon, and it has looked great recently. So I'm going to have to go against what you said here, Ray, and go against Tome. He's going to have those jitters. I think Lineker, this is going to be a crazy fight. They're going to throw down. I think Lineker is going to get a knockout in the first or second round.
Brad, are you siding with me or Brooks?
I'm going with Brooks on this one, man. You see, the thing about Tome is he's fought a lot of puddings. You know, if you go through that record and you look at the opponents he's faced, his 33rd fight, he fought a guy who was 0-0. He's fighting novices, he's fighting guys with losing records, and there's tons of Brazilian guys out there that are unsigned and they've got these massive records, but they've just not fought anybody. And that's kind of the downer about being on that Brazilian scene. You can stick around and fight for years and years and years, and as long as you're fighting puddings, there's always going to be a question about what that actually does for you as a fighter. The occasions that he's actually fought guys from decent camps, he fought one of the Nogueira's fighters earlier on in his career, Leandro Higo, and he's fought Jussier da Silva, and he's fought one of Roberto Traven's students as well, and all 3 times he's lost. John Lineker, on the other hand, as Brooks said, he's a great striker. He's got power in his hands. He's got a wicked right hand particularly. He's had multiple knockdowns in the UFC with that. I think the one thing Tome's got going for him is that he's a good straight puncher. So when Lineker's looping that right hand around, you're going to see Tome going straight down the pipe, maybe catching him to the punch. But I just think that Lineker is that little bit better a fighter. I think he's going to land that big right hand a couple of times, eventually going to land it sweet, finish him off on the floor. So I'm going with Lineker, TKO in the second round, and hopefully he can get that Walker's Crisp sponsorship like his big brother Gary.
Very well. Luke, what are your views on the fight?
I mean, I don't know an awful amount about either of these guys. I've seen I've seen Lineker fight once, I think it was against a guy called Asamat. I can't remember his last name. And you know, the flyweight is an exciting division. They're very, very quick and exciting. But I think the Tome, the newcomer, has got a lot more submission victories. And I understand what Brad's saying about the record. I just don't feel I don't think there's going to be a decisive winner here. It's come to decision. And I'm always going to go for a ground fighter against a striker, just because I feel like he can grind him out and get the win. Like I said, I don't know much about them. I just know that Lineker's most of his losses have come by submission. So I think that Tome's better than can grind out decisions, and I'm going to go for that. I'm going to go for Tome to win via decision. It's a bit of an uneducated guess because I don't know much about either.
Okay, so we've got me and Luke both siding with Tome, and then Brooks and Brad both siding with John Lineker. So we've got 2 and 2 there. We'll move on to the next fight. It's a middleweight fight, and I think it's certainly a fight that a lot of the UK fans are interested in. We've got Brazilian Thales Leites facing one of the UK's top middleweights, Tom Kong Watson. We've seen Tom go 1-1 in the UFC. His second fight was absolutely fantastic. Of course, he won knockout of the night and fight of the night. Probably rescued a card which was considered not a great card. I'm personally not a huge fan of Thales Leites. I've always found his style to be quite boring. I know he went on to fight Anderson Silva, but you know that's a fight that was it when Silva was going through a stage of just not really taking his opponent seriously. It wasn't really a great fight, even though he went 5 rounds with Silva. I remember one of his biggest wins was over Nate Marquardt. But in that fight, he won by decision, and I think Marquardt had 2 points deducted for a little bit of dubious refereeing. There were some really strange decisions in that fight. The way Watson fights, Watson's going to come and he's going to throw everything. If Thales Leites can't take Watson down to the ground, Watson's going to absolutely annihilate him with his striking, and we've seen Watson throw some crazy punches and elbows. I personally think Watson's going to get another spectacular knockout. I think Thales Leites might last a round, but as the fight goes on with the pace that Watson will set, I think he'll get a second round knockout. I'd love to see an elbow finish, but I'm going to go Watson round 2 knockout. Brooks, what are your views on Thales Leites versus Tom Kong Watson?
For the most part, I definitely agree with you. Thales Leites, he had a pretty good run there his first time in the UFC until he ran into Anderson Silva. I think he got a lucky decision win against Nate Marquardt when they fought, considering I believe Nate lost the point, and that helped Leites win the fight on the points. But he's won a bunch of fights outside of the UFC, but he's also lost outside. I don't think he has been fighting UFC caliber competition while he's been gone. So I don't think it's something that is gonna play a part, like he's been on this long streak beating great fighters. Now he's gonna come back into the UFC and make another run. I don't think that's what's gonna happen here. He did lose a close decision in his last fight against Alessio Sakara in the UFC, and I think that speaks volumes. I think that says a lot. Alessio Sakara isn't necessarily the most well-rounded great fighter out there. Not that he's not a good fighter, because he is. He's a good boxer, but I just think Watson is probably better everywhere else besides maybe in the jiu-jitsu aspect of the game. I think that Watson's takedown defense, submission defense is definitely going to be more than enough to hold up if it does happen to get to the ground. But other than that, I think that Watson's just going to batter him throughout the fight, and he'll probably end up getting. I wouldn't be surprised to seeing this go all the way to a decision, but I think that Watson will probably get to finish late in the fight, either in a late second round or into the third round with TKO.
Brad, what are your views on this fight?
I completely agree with Brooks on this one. And what do we know about Kong? Well, he's tough as nails. He's a good kicker from range. He's very powerful in the clinch, and he can drag guys into a real good scrap. And that's really not where Leites wants to be. Since Leites has left the UFC, he's had a few pretty decent wins. He's beat Jesse Taylor, he's beat Dean Lister, he's beat Jeremy Horn, he's beat Matt Horwich, he's beat Tor Trong. But that's not really the kind of guys that pose the problems that Tom Watson does. Which is a guy who's going to put you on the fence or stalk you down and batter you. And And I think that's going to be the key thing in this fight. I mean, if Tom suffers from anything, it's that occasionally he's got poor fight IQ. He struggles to change the game plan up if he's in a bad spot, and that's been taken advantage before by guys like Jesse Taylor and Brad Tavares. But I just don't think he's going to get those problems from Leites. Leites doesn't have a particularly great double leg, so if he wants to take Tom down, he's either going to have to catch a kick or he's going to get in a clinch and trip him. Now, if he gets in a clinch with Tom's a huge middleweight. I mean, I weigh 182 pounds soaking wet, and Tom absolutely towers over me, so I've got no idea how he makes that cut. He's a huge individual, and he's so good in the clinch. I think this goes late, like Brick said. I can see it going to the third round. I can see Tom getting a bit gassed. I can see Leites getting a bit gassed, but ultimately I see Tom stopping him with a nice combination up against the cage.
Luke, what are your views on this fight?
I mean, I've known Tom a long time. I've trained with the guy as well, and I mean, Brad touched on him being a big middleweight. I'm a bigger middleweight, but he is a pretty big middleweight. And it's not that impressed me about Tom. The thing that impressed me about Tom is just his pure work ethic and approach to MMA. And I'm surprised Brad thinks that he's going to gas, because I don't think I've ever seen Watson really gas in my life. His cardio and his output in fights is immense. And I think that's the key here. I mean, Thales and him are pretty much the same age, but I think Watson just fights at a much higher pace than anyone I really know on the feet. I mean, Thales is going to do well to get Watson down. If he does get Watson down, I think Watson gets straight back up, in my opinion. I think it's going to be, I don't think this fight's going to be all Watson in it by any sense. I think it's going to be a very, very tough fight. Thales is a tough guy, and Watson said himself he's come out this week or last week with some pretty outrageous claims that he's the most exciting MMA fighter in the world, if not in combat sports. And he also made a little bit of a dig at Bisping, saying that Michael Bisping's never beaten anyone that fought for a UFC title, and Watson plans to do that against Thales Leites, which I think shows a lot of confidence for Watson. And I think the main thing here, I mean, the biggest thing that Watson's up against is the fact he's fighting Thales Leites in Brazil. But I just feel like Watson's in a great place right now. He's training out of Rain MMA with Mark Munoz, who obviously just looked fantastic in his last fight against Boach. And Chael Sonnen's training there as well. So if you've got Chael Sonnen and Mark Munoz constantly trying to take you down, they're a different breed compared to Thales Leites. And I think that'll show in this fight. And I can see Watson either getting a TKO or just grinding out a pretty good decision by giving Thales a bit of a beating on the feet, to be honest.
So all four of us agree there. We're all going for Tom Kong Watson to beat Thales Leites in Brazil. We move on to a middleweight bout now. It's Cezar Ferreira, who won the first season of Tough Brazil, and he's facing Thiago Santos, who I believe is a replacement. I think his original opponent pulled out of the fight. I think he was due to fight Clint Hester, actually. I think that Luke probably know. I think he was due to fight Clint Hester, going on memory. But he
was originally supposed to fight someone else, and there was a pull-out, and then Clint Hester went in and had to pull out, and now he's fighting Thiago Santos, so he's had two pull-outs for this fight. Yeah.
I remember seeing the Clint Hester fight, because that really intrigued me, because Hester obviously looked really good in his last fight. I don't know a lot about Thiago Santos. His record is 8-1, but predominantly his fights are in Brazil. Cezar's record is probably worse. It's 5-2. But we saw Cezar Ferreira on Tough Brazil, and he obviously had a good running on the show. He was very good friends with Vitor Belfort, and he trained with him, and he's I think from what they said, he's kind of helped Vitor Belfort get where he was, and now Vitor Belfort's returning the favour. I feel this is a bit of a showcase fight for Ferreira. He's going to come out, he showed good strike on the show. I'm pretty sure he had a head kick knockout on the show. So I think he's going to come out and he's going to show his striking, and he's going to get a knockout. I don't know a lot about Santos though, but going on what I know of Ferreira and the fact he won Tough Brazil, and they normally like to show, not in all cases, but most cases they like to showcase the tough winners. I'm going to go for Cezar Ferreira to get a knockout in the first round. Brooks, what's your views on this fight?
Exactly like you said, I do not know a lot about Santos, so it's really hard to gauge exactly, what's going on. But I hate doing it. I don't like to base anything off of records or anything, but, I look at Thiago's record and I don't really see anybody I can recognize, and, you look back through him and, we know that Cezar won the Ultimate Fighter in Brazil, and like you said, Ray, it was probably with some help from Vitor giving him some better matchups. That way he'd have a easier run along there. I wish that we would have gotten the original matchup, but obviously there was an injury and he had to go in there and face Magalhaes, or I believe that's who it was. But either way, like you said, they like to showcase their Ultimate Fighter winners, especially in their first, 1 or 2 fights coming off of the win. And so, just like I said, it's hard because I don't know a lot about Thiago, but just basing it off of that, I'm going to have to go with Cezar. He does fight or train, with some great fighters, and I know that they'll have him prepared. So I believe that I'm just going to go with Cezar here, and I think he's probably going to get a TKO or knockout stoppage sometime, in the second round.
Brad, what are your views on this fight?
I'm going a bit differently than you guys, actually. I've seen a bit of Santos. He was actually on Ultimate Fighter Brazil 2. He was one of the favourites going in, but he was eliminated in the very first round before they actually get into the house. He got cut really early into his fight, about 30 seconds in. I think he was taken down, and then he took an elbow, and really bad cut across the brow. The fight was stopped, unfortunately. He's actually a really good striker. He's got very, very sharp kicks, really good kicks to the body, and really good finishing instincts as well. He creates really good angles when he comes in. He's not one of those guys who just steams forward. And he's got quite an active guard as well when he is put on his back. Saying that, he's not been really tested. I think we would have seen some good things from him if he'd managed to get into the house on Tough Brazil 2. But unfortunately that didn't happen. As far as Ferreira goes, a bit of an unorthodox striker. He's got a capoeira background, so lots of crazy spinning stuff. Unfortunately, that can be a negative. If you watch his fights, he quite often moves in with his hands down. He's not got great head movement. He fought on a superior challenge against Mutachike, and got banged out really, really hard. He got stung with a left hand, I think it was. Really wobbled him, and then he walked straight onto a right, which completely turned his lights out. He wasn't creating any angles. He just went straight forward, hands down. So maybe that's something that Santos can take advantage of. I don't think either of these guys have really been tested yet. I'm going to go with the upset. I'm going to go with Santos with a first round knockout.
Luke, what are your views on this fight?
I didn't really watch Tough Brazil. Brazil, I caught bits and bobs of it, and I followed the media of it more than anything else. I know that Ferreira had, he got to the final on his own, but the finale for the show, the guy he was meant to fight had to pull out due to injury. He was going to fight
Daniel Serafin.
Daniel Serafin, thank you. But he had to pull out, so he fought a guy called Sergio, and he beat him on a decision. I don't know. He's powerful. I know that for a fact, and obviously he trains with a great camp. I just feel like he's going to struggle against Santos. I think he had a lot of change of pace with who he's going to fight and when he's going to fight them. And it's different to keep changing up your camp for different opponents. And I just feel like it's going against him a little bit. So I don't know much about Thiago Santos. I've seen him fight once, I think. And like Brad said, he's a very crisp striker. Again, not a big name, not done much in the sport yet to take note of. But I just feel like he'll be a bit more hungry. It's a big name for him to take out because he won Tough Brazil. And I'm going to go for the upset as well. I think Thiago's going to pick him off, and I think it'll be a second round, maybe third round. Because, Ferreira, very powerful guy, but he does struggle with keeping up for the full 3 rounds. He's won a lot of fights by knockout early on, first round, second round. I think if you can take him into the late second, third round, you can start to take him apart. And Santos fights with that sort of style, So, yeah, I could see Santos getting the win.
Interestingly, then we've got a 50-50 split there. We've got me and Brooks siding with Cezar Ferreira, and Brad and Luke siding with Thiago Santos. We'll move on to the co-main event. It's a probably fair to say it's a blockbuster fight. We've got Lyoto Machida, one of the top light heavyweights in the world, versus Phil Davis, who's probably just in and around the bottom half of the top 10 for light heavyweights. I love watching Machida fight. His style is great. He's very evasive. His wrestling takedown defense is fantastic. We've seen some really good guys struggle to take him down. And the way he sees his strikes and the way he lands it, he's just phenomenal. It's mad because when he first joined the UFC, he was fighting, obviously working his way up fighting these lower tier guys, and he was winning he was cruising through his fights. He was winning, but he wasn't winning impressively, but he was winning. And then when he stepped up in competition to start facing the top people like Thiago Silva and Rashad Evans, all of a sudden he started knocking these people out. And then, of course, when he fought Randy Couture, he threw one of the craziest kicks I think we've ever seen in not just in the UFC, but probably in MMA, with the crane kick. Phil Davis, Phil Davis is obviously a very, very good fighter, but he's not someone I get excited to watch. His last fight against Vinny Magalhaes I didn't think was a great fight. He tends to be one of these guys that does enough to win without really winning impressively. I think Machida will keep the fight standing. I think his takedown defence will be too good for Davis to get him down. And I think if he keeps it standing, he'll eventually land something that will put Phil Davis away. We haven't seen Phil Davis been stopped yet, I don't believe. I know we lost to Rashad Evans by decision, but I don't think he's actually been stopped. So I think Machida will be the first person to knock out Phil Davis. It's very hard to pick around with Machida because it'll just be as and when the moment comes. So I'll go for late. Let's go for a round 3 Machida knockout. Brooks, what are your views on this fight?
I think that you hit it spot on, Ray. Phil Davis I think he's a really great mixed martial artist. His wrestling is leaps and bounds ahead of most fighters, in MMA, let alone his own division. Lyoto Machida, on the other hand, he's got, great takedown defense, just like you said, Ray. And his striking is, in my opinion, probably definitely better than Phil Davis's. Phil did showcase some really good boxing against Vinny in his last fight. He showed that he is improving. But that being said, I still don't believe you can he can match, a lifetime of striking training that Lyoto has put in. So, I think it's pretty clear to see. I don't want to, be too harsh like I've said before, but it's pretty clear to see that this is, the fight that favors Machida. I guess if Davis can end up putting him on his back, because he does have the best wrestling pretty much in the division, if he can put him on his back, then, maybe he can make it a long night for Machida, but I just don't see it happening because we've seen Lyoto in the past how great his takedown defense is. And, that combined with his great striking, I just think that Davis is in for a world of trouble this fight. And, I don't think he's going to get a finish here. I think that, he could stun Phil. He could put him in a really, really dangerous position. But I think Phil, he should be able to recover quickly enough to, fend off any finishes. I think I'm going to pick Machida here by decision.
Brad, what are your views on this fight?
I like this fight. I'm a big Machida fan. I have been, since he first started off in MMA. I just think, he's such a unique, orthodox guy. I mean, the first martial art I ever did was karate, so it's pretty cool seeing a karate guy go in there and do some damage in the UFC. He's got excellent footwork and a really unorthodox way of moving around the cage. As you guys have said, very difficult to take down. In terms of his actual takedown defense, and in terms of the fact that he's just so hard to get a hold of in the first place. I think one of his best qualities is his patience. Sometimes he's been criticised for perhaps being a bit boring in there, but he's a guy who can wait and not get flustered, and he's got his game plan, he sticks to it, and nothing that you do is ever going to take him out of that. And of course, as we've seen a few times, he's got that knockout power as well. I think the key for Machida here is to draw Davis onto him, which is so often the key for Machida in fights, and that's where his patience comes into play. We've seen Davis be a bit befuddled by good strikers before. That's what Machida's game is. That's what he's going to do to him. Machida's had a lot of success against grapplers because they have to come onto him to implement their game plan, and that's when he's in his element with that counter punching. Davis, on the other hand, obviously great athlete, high level wrestler. striking perhaps a bit underdeveloped in terms of fighting the top guys in the division, like Machida. He's an explosive guy. He's a very strong guy, and he's got the ability to smother dudes on the ground. He's not had to deal with many really high-level strikers in their prime, and when he has, that's when he struggled. You know, he lost to Rashad Evans. In my mind, he lost the fight to Nogueira as well. I think, you know, Nogueira clearly outboxed him and took 2 of those rounds, but that's an argument for another day. He's not clunky like Ryan Bader was, so I don't think we're going to see him walk onto a big knockout like Ryan Bader did, but I think he will get picked apart. I don't think it'll be the most thrilling fight in the world, but I think Machida picks him off and takes a decision.
Luke, what are your views on this fight?
I'm a huge Machida fan. Like, when I only started MMA 4 years ago. Pretty much April 2009 I started MMA, so it's not been that long. But when I started, Lyoto was leading up to fighting for the title. And he fought Rashad Evans, and I remember it pretty well. I'm just a huge fan of his. I remember when he won the title, he had his gi on and he had the belt around him, and he has the Brazilian flag behind him, and he said something like, if you have a dream, you know, believe, or something like that, you can achieve it, or something like that. You know, and it was quite an inspiring moment for me, which is a bit weird, because usually, you know, watching fights, I don't really get that, you know, behind it in that sort of emotional way. But with the Machida fight, I did. I think it was early on, and I mean, we know a lot about the sport. But it was quite a big moment for me, and I really like watching him fight because of that. And I just feel like he's had a wealth of experience compared to Phil Davis, fighting the top tier of guys. You know, he's won the title, lost the title, fought for the title again, and he's just an unbelievable athlete in such a different way. I was there when he fought Dan Henderson recently. Obviously, you know, that fight was criticised in a way, but you can see what a fantastic martial artist Machida is in that fight, with simple things like how he took Dan Henderson down from a Greco position, you know, like in the wrestling, you know, outskilling someone like Dan Henderson there is really impressive. And I just think he, because he's an unorthodox style martial artist, he gets a lot of people don't believe in the rest of his skills, like his jiu-jitsu, his wrestling, you know, they just see the karate side of things. And I think he's a really complete fighter. And I don't think Phil Davis is yet. I think Phil Davis is a fantastic athlete, one of the best, and I think he's got a brilliant will to win. And he, you know, given him a couple of years, he's still quite young. He could be a champion one day. But right now, I think, you know, this is a bit too much too soon for Phil Davis, and Machida wins. I don't know how, you know, I'm not really bothered about how. I'm just looking forward to watching this fight and being a bit of a fan and watching Machida do his thing, because, you know, it could be something spectacular, or it could just outwit his opponent and take him to a decision.
So we've got all 4 of us there, siding with Lyoto Machida. We move on to the main event. It's for the featherweight title. It's Jose Aldo, of course, fighting in Brazil. He was set to fight Anthony Pettis, and of course there's been a mix and match with title fights. Anthony Pettis has gone on to fight for the lightweight title, and stepped in for the featherweight is the Korean zombie, Sung-Jung, who's had some phenomenal moments in the UFC. I think his last fight with Dustin Poirier was just unbelievable, and of course what he did to Mark Hominick was unbelievable as well. Jose Aldo, of course, is one of the greatest ever. He's one of the top guys, the pound for pound. And Aldo has had some fantastic moments. I mean, his win over Chad Mendes was fantastic, but he's also had some moments where he's won, but he's kind of scraped a win. I mean, his early rounds, he annihilated Mark Hominick and then kind of hung on in there in the end. His fights with Frankie Edgar and Kenny Florian were very close, especially the later the fight goes on. I honestly think he's going to come out and end the fight. I think he'll get a stoppage over Korean Zombie. We've seen Korean Zombie, of course, get stopped in the past. If the fight goes on later, then I think that's where Aldo tends to struggle. I know he cuts a lot of weight for featherweight, and he's talked about going up to lightweight, and maybe that will have a bigger impact on it, an improvement on his cardio. If the fight goes on late, I think he's in trouble, but I think he still wins. But I think he'll make a statement in this fight. I think he's going to get a spectacular knockout, and we're going to see the Korean Zombie put to sleep. So I'll say Jose Aldo round 2 knockout, but I think it's going to be a really, really good fight. Brooks, what are your views on this fight?
I can't wait for this fight. You know, in all actuality, I was a bit disappointed that they brought in the Korean Zombie to get, as a replacement. I thought that Ricardo Lamas deserved that spot more so than anybody at the time. But at the same time, I think the Korean Zombie makes for a better matchup against Jose, and it'll probably be a better fight. And in all actuality, I also believe that he does have a better shot at beating Jose than someone like Ricardo did. And I believe that you're right, Ray, with as far as the cardio thing, we have seen Jose kind of fade in the later rounds, but at the same time, he's still winning these fights fairly decisively. And the Korean Zombie, before he had came into the WEC, he had a fight coming up, his first fight against Leonard Garcia, and I did a little research on him, and I watched some of his fights, and I was like, holy hell, man, this guy is really good. And Leonard was a huge favorite, I believe, going into that fight, and I had figured that the Korean Zombie would probably win, and sure enough, Leonard got one of those decisions that he always seems to somehow get, and Sung-Jung kind of got ripped off there, and of course they had that rematch where he had that great twister submission that was the first time they had seen that in the UFC or whatever, like Joe Rogan was saying. But before that too, man, I had all these big expectations for Sung-Jung, and we seen him go in there against George Roop and just look awful. I don't know if it was an off night for him. I don't know if he was injured, he was fighting sick. I don't know, but I expected a lot more out of him against George Roop, and he just got knocked out, and it was a bad knockout. But since then, he's beat Garcia, like I said, he's beat Hominick real fast, one of the fastest knockouts in history, and Poirier in one of the fights of the year in 2012, and that was a great submission with the Bravo choke. Man, it's almost like I can smell an upset about to happen, because everyone's counting Sung-Jung out of this fight. Nobody thinks he has a chance, and he's just one of those guys that makes things happen. He's underrated. He's got great all-around skills. He's got great striking. He's got great submissions. And, aside from that Leonard Garcia fight, I haven't seen too many things that he's done wrong. But that being said, Jose Aldo's Jose Aldo, and he's obviously the best featherweight on the planet. I don't see, it's hard to pick against him. And just for the sake of not wanting to lose to you guys, damn it, I'm not going to pick against him, because the smart money is definitely on Jose. I see Jose, if he's going to win this fight, he's gonna probably end up getting a finish here, and I'll say he wins by knockout sometime in the third round.
Brad, what are your views on this fight?
Well, one of my favourite MMA stories was told to me by Grant Wharton a few years ago. About 2004, 2005. He was running a seminar with Shaolin Ribeiro, and down in Portsmouth, I think it was. And Shaolin brought these two young Brazilian lads over with him, and they were about 17, 18. And Shaolin was saying to Grant, "Oh, my friend really needs a fight. Can you get him on a fight card while he's over in England? He's poor, he's broke. He just needs a few quid to take back to his family with him." And as luck would have it, there was a show in Portsmouth that weekend, and Phil Harris, who's now in the UFC, he was about 9-2 at the time. His opponent dropped out, and they didn't really want to do it because this kid apparently had only had 1 or 2 fights over in Brazil. And but it was like one of those last minute things. They paid him about 150 quid to fight Phil Harris. And the next thing you know, this kid just starts throwing these leg kicks and just chops Phil Harris down and cuts him with a knee or an elbow. And it turned out the kid was Jose Aldo. And I think that's an awesome little story. But big Aldo fan. Dude's got leg kicks for days, good combinations. He's got good knees from the clinch and from range. And he's really mastered that Brazilian brawling style of Thai boxing. And of course, the hometown advantages that he has in Brazil. Last time we saw him in Rio against Chad Mendes, it was absolutely nuts. The energy he draws from the crowd is insane. I think what you've got to look at really is the fights that he's had with Frankie Edgar and Mark Hominick, and say, is Sung-Jung as good as those fighters? Sung-Jung is one of my favourite fighters in the world, but I just don't think he is as good as Edgar and Hominick. He's got great boxing, he's got an underrated ground game, and he's good at mixing those together. he's kind of ditched that zombie style after the George Roop knockout. You know, he was very vocal about the fact that he's not just going to, you know, walk straight at guys and take as much punishment anymore. But as we saw in the fight with Poirier, he can be dragged into that. I think if he's going to have any success, he really needs to go for the body shots. He's got to blend that grappling and try and wear Jose Aldo down like Mark Hominick did. But as you guys have said before, you know, Hominick only really had success towards the end of that fight. And my concern is whether the Korean Zombie will be able to last that long. I think if he can stay out of Aldo's way, land some body shots, maybe get a couple of takedowns later on, he might have a chance to get some success. But I just don't see it. You know, I think it's going to be a bit of a war for 2 or 3 rounds, but I think we're probably going to see maybe the referee stepping in to stop the punishment on the Korean Zombie round about the third round.
Luke, what are your views on this fight?
Just to build on Brad's story a little bit, you know, he was saying about Grant Woodman and that fight between Harris and Aldo. My coach, Robbie Olivier, he was the best featherweight in Europe for a little while. He was cage rage champ, and it was around this time. And Nigel, you know, one of Robbie's coaches, told me a story where he saw that him and Robbie were sitting there watching this fight that you're talking about down in Portsmouth. And I remember halfway through the fight, Robbie turned around and we looked at each other, and we didn't say anything, but it was just a look of, you know, maybe we should try and avoid this guy, because he looks pretty dangerous. So, you know, Jose, he's been around a long time. You know, he's been fighting for a very, very long time. Obviously, like we said, he's the best featherweight on the planet, without a doubt. I like the Korean Zombie, but I think the Korean Zombie's a fighter. You know, in his last 3 fights, he's got sub of the night, or a knockout of the night, or a fight of the night, or, you know, he's that sort of guy. He's more like a Joe Lozon, you know, you know, those sort of fighters. Great to watch, you know, unbelievably talented. I just never see them being a champion, you know, and I think that's the Korean Zombie. I think he's going to go at Aldo. It's going to be a fantastic fight, but at the end of the day, Aldo wins. The most amazing thing about Jose Aldo, in my opinion, which no one really talks about for some reason, is just his ability to not get taken down by such high-level wrestlers. Everyone talks about wrestling, you know, how America, like, their wrestling capabilities are amazing, and that's what you need to be a champion, and, you know, talk about people like Chris Weidman and all this sort of stuff. And Jose Aldo just seems to, you know, possess something that can stop that, you know, when he fought Chad Mendes, and it's just, he's so hard to take down. And I think if you want to go to war with him on the feet, you're going to lose. And the Korean Zombie doesn't possess what it takes to get into the mat, in my opinion. And I just see Aldo teeing off on a guy who just really isn't up there when it comes to the stand-up on Aldo's level. I don't know how it's going to end. You know, I think it'll be a TKO, but we'll see. I just think whatever happens, Jose's going to get his hand raised at the end of the night.
Okay, so all 4 of us there siding with Jose Aldo. I don't think that's really a big surprise. So that's our predictions for UFC 163. It's myself, Brooks, UFC middleweight Luke Barnatt, and MMA journalist Brad Wharton. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks. We'll be breaking down the UFC Fight Night, which is headlined by Shogun Hua and Luke's coach from the Ultimate Fighter, Chael Sonnen. So check that out, and thanks for listening to